slack water is the time between the ebb and the flow. For a few hours, the sand and silt settle on the ocean floor. A world of man-made objects comes into view. Beneath the waves, from the Tyne to the Humber, lie hundreds of barks, brigantines, trawlers and military craft. Each one the victim of a storm, an accident, or a desperate confrontation. When the sea is still, the bold and the brave descend into the darkness to search for wrecks. They stay there until the tide turns and the depths are stirred once again by fast-flowing currents. On all wrecks, wood, iron and steel gradually decay. Salt corrosion, metal-eating bacteria and constant pounding from shifting seas all play their part. Bows buckle, cables corrode, and each vessel, regardless of size or status, gradually returns to nature, leaving little or no evidence that it was ever there.
Divers are like underwater detectives searching for clues. Is it a trawler? A coastal transport? Does it have the sleek telltale lines of a submarine? Often there is very little to see. Boilers and engines tend to last the longest, but many wrecks remain classed as unidentified, forgotten Jane Does of the deep, with nothing to suggest where they came from or when they were built. A maker's mark on an engine can help. There's only one surefire way to give a boat a name and confirm its final resting place. Cast from brass or bronze, engraved with the name of the craft and the year it was built, the ship's bell is a treasured prize. Finding the bell and bringing it to the surface is cause for great celebration for any diving team. The divers from the Scarborough Sub Aqua Club, and in particular the crew of the Northstar, have found many bells on wrecks around these shores. Each sunken vessel has a story to tell. Tales where tragedy, triumph, and heroic acts of bravery were commonplace during hard days at sea when the bell still rang loud and clear across the water for all to hear. Tonight, we will hear them once again. In the age of sail, every ship had an hourglass. The glass held half an hour of sand. Every half hour, the ship's boy would ring the ship's bell and turn the glass again. The first watch would start at 8 p.m, continue until midnight. At 8:30 p.m, the bell would ring once. At 9, twice, 9:30, 3 times, and so on. At midnight, as 8 bells sound, the first watch ends and the new watch begins.
Fathom 5 by father long.
the Merry Islington, 1915, the 6th of May, 6 miles north of the Whitby Buoy. The posters on the railway station walls still entreated people to remember Scarborough. It was 5 months since the bombardment, and the town still bore the scars. Many of the town's young men were now enlisted and training for war. Some already served with the merchant fleet. The Merry Islington, a 147-ton fishing trawler, left Scarborough Harbour early on the 5th, fished overnight and ended just north of Whitby. Skipper James Walker's crew were preparing the nets for the morning's trawl when suddenly they were stunned by the loud report of a cannon, followed by the spray from a shell hitting the water just ahead of the bow. From out of the morning mist, U-boat U9 appeared, heading directly towards them. The deck gun was manned and armed sailors were gathered around the conning tower. The Merry's crew of 9 were told to leave immediately. The odds not in their favour, the crew climbed into their boats and pulled away. A bomb was rigged on board, and at 10 a.m. she exploded and went swiftly to the bottom. Her crew were picked up by a minesweeper which landed them at Whitby. By tea time, the crew of the Merry were back in Scarborough, shocked and upset, but safe and sound. A long way from the battlefields of Ypres and Gallipoli, the town of Scarborough discovered that it now had its own battle, one that would continue for the next 4 years in the cold waters of the North Sea. The bell of the Merry Islington. The Otter, 1916, the 24th of September, 20 miles northeast of Scarborough. Scarborough's wartime fishing fleet was impressive. 16 steam-powered trawlers and a host of smaller craft bringing vital food supplies to the country and much-needed money back to the families in the town. On that cold September night, 11 Scarborough trawlers had their nets down alongside others from Whitby, Hull and Hartlepool. Suddenly, from out of the darkness, U-57 surfaced next to the Fisher Prince. Having subdued the crew and secured them on the deck, the men of the Imperial German Navy proceeded to capture the crews of all but one of the other boats. They watched in horror as the trawlers were then systematically sunk by either gunfire, scuttling, or by charges laid in the hold. The Otter was the second to go down. The German commander, Ritter von Georg, was more interested in destroying the enemy's ability to fish than in murdering fellow seamen. His actions spared the lives of 126 men who were placed on a neutral Norwegian steamer. They arrived safely in South Shields the following morning. In the newspapers, the event came to be described as the Gentleman's Massacre. With so many boats lost, Scarborough's fishing industry took a long time to recover. On the morning of the 25th of September, a lone trawler, the Ben Hope, steamed back into harbour with a full catch. Fishing away from the main fleet, skipper Walter Crawford had heard gunfire, had the crew haul in the nets and quickly turned for home. The Ben Hope was lucky. The Otter still lies upright on the seabed, surrounded by the other 13 trawlers that were lost that night, so close to home. The Bell of the Otter.
Huge
The St Ninian, 1917, the 7th of February, 3 miles east of Whitby. Before the ignominious end of his tenure as First Lord of the Admiralty in November 1915, Winston Churchill issued a fateful edict. He was incensed that so many merchant vessels were being lost to the enemy with little resistance, and he decreed that all merchant vessels should be armed with a gun on deck. He also stated that should an enemy submarine be spotted on the surface, any nearby merchant ship should ram them. As a result, U-boat commanders became more cautious. They were now much more likely to torpedo any craft as soon as they were sighted. The St Ninian was sailing with a cargo of iron ore bound for Middlesbrough when she responded to an SOS from the torpedoed steamer SS Corsican Prince. The St Ninian launched a rescue boat to try and save the crew, many of whom were already in the water. As she came about, the men from the Corsican Prince were frantically waving their arms in the air, trying to make themselves heard over the churning winter sea. Too late, the St Ninian spied the periscope of UB-34 in the waves nearby. With a sickening thud followed by a huge explosion, a torpedo struck the St Ninian between the engine room and the number 3 hold. The steamer sank almost immediately, taking half her complement of 28 crew with her. The boat she had launched saved all but one of the men from the Corsican Prince. The UB-34 remained submerged and continued its run of destruction along the Yorkshire coast. It would seem that the gentleman's war was well and truly over. The bell of the St Ninian.
the Melanie, 1918, the 16th of June, 2 miles east of Robin Hood's Bay. As the war progressed, the merchant ships became more cautious too. They now travelled in packs. The large screw steamer, the SS Melanie, was travelling north. She was making 7 knots as part of a convoy with 17 other ships and 4 escort vessels, 2 to starboard and 2 astern on the port side. By 1918, there had been 42 U-boats operating in the North Sea, and 1 in every 4 merchant vessels headed for Britain was being sunk. The convoy and the escort seemed a prudent measure against attack. For the Melanie, however, this precaution did not save her. At 9:55 p.m, a huge shock was felt throughout the ship, and a plume of water 70 feet high rose into the air. Immediately she began to list to starboard, and after frantic attempts to stabilise her, the order was given to abandon ship. All was going smoothly until the mechanism lowering the port lifeboat jammed, and suddenly the occupants were tipped into the surging waves below. A nearby trawler managed to rescue 7 men from the water, but the other 5 were drowned. The ship foundered at 20 past 10 and went down by the head. The SS Melanie joined another 120 ships in this area, sunk by torpedoes during the war. Not far from the Melanie lie 2 poignant reminders that there are no winners in any war. Imperial German submarines, the UB-41 and the UB-75, lost in 1917 with all hands, lie where they settled after falling foul of a minefield just out to sea from Robin Hood's Bay. Altogether, 178 U-boats and their crews were lost between 1914 and 1918. 5 months after the loss of the Melanie, the armistice was signed. And finally, this turbulent and destructive chapter of maritime history was brought to a peaceful close. The Bell of the Melanie. 1861. Scarborough's first official lifeboat, the Amelia, was presented to the town at the end of September. Early in the morning of Saturday the 2nd of November, barely a month since she arrived, a storm of hurricane proportions blew into town. Boats in the harbour were tossed up onto Sandside, and the houses on North Street were nearly destroyed by the force of the wind. Just offshore, a schooner, the Coupland, was in serious trouble. She tried to enter the harbour, but her sails were torn away, and the strong tide carried her across South Bay, where she became firmly lodged on the rocks 50 yards from the spar sea wall. The Amelia was launched, and the crew manned the oars and bravely fought the wind and the current to try and reach the Coupland. A crowd gathered at the spar, and they watched in horror as the lifeboat, bobbing up and down like a cork, was dashed against the spar wall twice, washing oars and crew members over the side. Brave souls on shore tried to help, but several of them were also swept away by the heavy sea. Most of the crew and their rescuers made it back with much assistance from onlookers. The Amelia drifted away and was smashed on the rocks to the south of the spar. 2 lifeboatmen were lost, along with 3 of their rescuers. In the Scarborough area alone that day, 24 lives were lost due to the storm. The crew of the Coupland all arrived safely on shore, thanks to lines delivered by rockets. Their ship was not so lucky. She too was dashed to pieces on the rocks. The storm was over by 9 p.m. that evening, and the townspeople came out to survey the damage. Over the ensuing years, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution grew to become the valued emergency service that saves many lives and vessels around our coast. Since the Amelia, 2 new lifeboat houses have been built to house 18 new lifeboats and many inflatable inshore vessels. Scarborough crews have received 35 medals for gallantry. When the wind rises and the waves crash over the harbour walls, we can only imagine how it must have felt to be out to sea during those terrible storms of the 19th century, and the courage it must have taken for the volunteer crews to man the lifeboat and haul away. Disperser, 1934, 8th of February, 11 miles north-northeast of Staithes. The Disperser was a salvage vessel, originally built as a gunboat in 1873. 2 of the 8-man crew worked as deep-sea divers, wearing traditional large metal helmets with oxygen pumped by hand from the surface. Travelling from Whitby, this hard-working old steamer had low steam power, and the decision was made to tow her all the way to Ramsgate using the tugboat Trover. She rounded Flamborough Head and progress was good, but as she was entering Bridlington Bay, she developed a leak. Captain Doran contacted the owners, who ordered him to return to Middlesbrough for repairs. Doran duly turned about and headed north-northeast again. A fierce storm swept in slowly during the night. The leak became a torrent as the ship was pounded again and again by heavy seas. The Disperser fired several distress flares, and at 4 a.m. the new Brunswick Bay lifeboat, the Always Ready, was launched. After a perilous outward journey, the lifeboat arrived, and coxswain Robert Patton realised that the Disperser was sinking fast. 7 of the crew had already made it safely to the Trover, but the old cook was unable to make the jump. Robert Patton managed to get him into the lifeboat, but a sudden swell pushed the 2 men into the water. Patton clung to the man to keep him safe, even when the lifeboat was dashed against the side of the Disperser. All were saved that night, and Patton and the tugboat captain were hailed as heroes. When the bell was recovered by the Northstar crew, they also found helmets and boots from the original dive crew. These artefacts have been worn in the harbour at Scarborough, allowing diver Andy Jackson to see the fascinating undersea world through the eyes of his 1930s counterpart. The bell of the Disperser.
Fire glow. 1941, the 8th of December. 4 nautical miles east-southeast of East Dudgeon, Dogger Bank. From 1939 to 1945, the North Sea was once again host to the ferocious struggle between ships and men. U-boats again plied their grim trade, and once more the victims were merchant ships delivering supplies up and down the east coast. The Fireglow was an unassuming single-propeller steamship owned by the London-based Gas, Light and Coke Company, the company that eventually became British Gas. She was travelling north from the Thames estuary, destined for the Tyne to collect a cargo of coal for the furnaces of London. Most of the regular crew of 17 and 3 gun crew were doing their best to keep warm below. The watch was kept as routine, but the captain believed that no one would want to attack a lone coal transport, particularly on this cold winter evening. The captain was right. There wasn't an enemy on the surface, or a U-boat below that sent her to the bottom that night. She steamed into the middle of a minefield laid as a trap for unsuspecting British merchantmen. The Fireglow went down fast. One poor donkey man, Richard Nelson, went down with her, but the rest of the crew managed to row to safety in one of the lifeboats. Today, she lies 21 metres down on the silty sand, her bows facing north-northwest. One of the many unfortunate ships and boats to end their working lives on the bottom of the North Sea during the Second World War. The bell of the Fireglow.
The Orchestra, 1951, the 5th of September, 11 miles east of Robin Hood's Bay. Peacetime can be just as treacherous as wartime when it comes to the sea. Hopefully no one's shooting at you or trying to send you to the bottom, but accidents still happen. Grimsby fishing trawler, the Orchestra, was heading home with a full catch. A large ship was seen closing on them from out of the mist. The skipper assured the helmsman that they had right of way and not to worry. Too late, they realised that the steamer had not noticed them through the mist that lay in patches about them. Steamship the Maria Biblioni hit them in the bow, and the Orchestra began to take on water. The crew quickly prepared to abandon ship, trying to save what they could of their personal possessions. The ship's papers were lost, but the cook managed to save his 69-year-old pipe. They didn't manage to launch the sloop or the lifeboat, and many of the men ended up in the water. Thankfully, the Biblioni's Italian crew saved them and took them all to Rotterdam, and they eventually arrived back in Hull a few days later. 23-year-old deck trimmer Marcus Prue made it home to Scarborough, and the other 9 men returned to their respective East Coast homes. There was one casualty. Skipper Thomas Darwood always regretted losing his favourite gold watch that night. The bell of the Orchestra. The Pandora, 1951, the 22nd of October, north of Staithes. Sometimes, despite gallant rescue attempts, due to the sheer ferocity of the waves and the weather, ships are lost despite being within sight of shore. The SS Pandora was heading south from the Firth of Tay with a cargo of whinstone chippings. Bound for Hull, she was struggling with high seas and a wind blowing at gale force 8. At 6:30 that morning, the Staithes Coast Guard saw the distinctive red bursts of a signal flare out to sea. The word was passed along the coast that a ship was in distress. 4 different lifeboat crews tried to help. Redcar, Runswick Bay and the Whitby lifeboats were all prevented from launching by heavy seas. One lifeboat from Teesmouth managed to launch, but feared it would not get there in time. A nearby steamer, the Gritfast, was also struggling with the mountainous swell, but they tried to get the men off before the now foundering Pandora went down. Pandora attempted to launch her boats, first on the lee side and then on the windward. Both attempts failed, and the lifeboats were lost. The master of the Gritfast poured oil on the water in an attempt to ease the waves and encouraged the crew to jump overboard, but no one dared take the risk. The Gritfast sent lines over, but the crew on the stricken boat were too exhausted to hold on. The 2 ships swung round stern to stern in the swell, and they collided, damaging the Gritfast propeller and causing the Pandora to take on more water. As the 2 vessels drifted apart, the Pandora listed to port and then sank. All of the crew of 6 were lost. The Gritfast dropped anchor on the leeward shore to wait assistance. The Teesside lifeboat arrived just too late, and although they searched the area, they found no survivors. The sea subsided as quickly as it had risen, and by midday, all was calm once more. At the inquest, it came to light that the Pandora's radio was a broadcast receiver and not a transmitter. Perhaps if they'd been able to radio their mayday rather than relying on distress flares, the outcome could have been different. The bell of the Pandora. And so, with 8 bells, we come to the end of the watch. The sailors stand down and head towards the aft companionway. The new watch nods as they pass, buttoning up their coats and pulling their caps down low in readiness for the next 4 hours. They'll need to stay alert. Who knows what dangers lurk in the mist or lie in wait for them behind the horizon. We wish them well and hope they arrive safely at their destination. The men and women of Scarborough Sub Aqua Club are passionate about maritime history, marine conservation, and they love exploring dark and dangerous places that most of us would be too scared to go. The crew of the Northstar collected most of the bells and artefacts mentioned here tonight. Founding members Andy Jackson and Carl Racing are remembered with great respect, admiration and affection by fellow divers, friends and families. Their groundbreaking work in the field of underwater exploration, discovery and documentation is inspirational and exceptional. The Lloyd's Ship Register lists 50,000 known wrecks in the North Sea, and they have declared it one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the world. As new generations of divers follow in the slipstream of the Northstar crew, we can only imagine what new discoveries remain to be made beneath the waves around our coast.
On damp ocean floor lie ships beyond all sorrow, still from fair familiar shore. We'll set our course tomorrow, far beyond the sun. Rise glow where the blue and bottlenose below. Clear skies above, calm waters there below. We ply our island trade, this cultural tradition. What journeys we have made, each quest, each secret mission, far beyond the sun. Rise glow where the blue and bottlenose blow. Clear skies above, calm waters there below. Ride the turning tide where the current ebb and flow. Time to board and ring the bell and bid your